And now, let's welcome our moderator for Plenary Session 2, DOST-Philippines Academician, Evelyn May Texon Mendoza.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second plenary session of the 41st Annual Scientific Meeting, where discussions on plastic waste will be presented. Before I introduce our speaker, may I request the audience to look at your question forms at the table and be sure to write down your questions, or in your kits. And please give your questions to the usher or usherettes at the side of the stage later on. So let us now proceed with our first speaker for the plenary session. Our main speaker is Academician Fabian M. David. He is Professor Emeritus at the Ateneo de Manila University, where he taught since 1983. He has a BS in Chemistry degree from the Ateneo, 1975, Master of Arts and PhD degrees in Chemistry from Princeton University. And he also spent time as a research associate at Oxford University. He returned to the Philippines with the Balik Scientist Long-Term Award in 1982. His areas of interest are in the chemistry of natural products, environmental chemistry, I will add nanotechnology, and also, as his father's son, coconut oil. He was a Presidential Lingkod Bayan awardee in 1987 for work done on medicinal plants and the 10 Outstanding Young Men or TOIM awardee for chemistry in 1992. In 2009, he was elected as academician to the National Academy of Science and Technology, Philippines, and he is now the Vice President of NASFIL. We would like to remind our speaker that he will be given 40 minutes for his presentation, and when your time is up, you will hear this bell sound. So let us now welcome Academician Fabian M. David.
Thank you, Dr. Mendoza. And good afternoon to everyone. I have a pleasure to give the opening presentation on plastic waste. But before I begin, I'd like to have a disclaimer. I don't do research on plastic. Actually, our three panelists have research projects on plastic and interactions with LGUs, so they will provide some of the content. And the reason I'm here is because I'm chair of the Mathematical and Physical Sciences Division, and we selected plastic waste as a major concern. This is a summary of three of the regional scientific meetings that we held. So we had three regional scientific meetings, and the topics of those regional scientific meetings are given here. So we had it in Visayas, in Tacloban, in Luzon, in Alumino City, and then in Mindanao, in Coronadal City. And those are the list of the speakers who presented there. And Academician Rola is speaking later, as well as Academician Del Rosario and Dr. Panganiban. So when we talk about plastic waste, it's really a multifaceted issue, and it's important to recognize this. Of course, there's the concern for plastic pollution, and here we have the concern for ocean pollution, poisoning of whales and sea turtles, and their health impacts. Then we talk about plastic waste. We have the 3 R's, reduce, recycle, and the Law on Ecological Solid Waste Management Act 9003. We also have to talk about plastic products. consumer demand and lifestyle, and lifecycle analysis. We cannot manage the issue of plastic waste unless we also address the issue of consumer demand and lifestyle. And of course, plastic is part of Industry 4.0, and later we'll also be talking about biodegradable plastics. So all of these are part of the discussion when we talk about plastic waste. So plastic is a defining material of our time, and plastic waste has become a defining challenge of our time. Today, each person on the average consumes as much plastic as his own weight. So if you're 60 kilograms, then on the average, you also consume 60 kilograms of plastic. And this is projected to nearly double in the next 10 to 15 years. So sustainability demands a complete rethinking of the plastic that we produce and the way that we manage it. So my talk will have 3 parts. First, understanding what plastic waste is, or what plastic is actually. Discuss 3 R's to the 4 R's, and strategies for the management of plastic waste in the Philippines. So first, what are plastics? Well, plastics are synthetic polymer materials that can be formed into useful shapes with useful characteristics and functions. Of course, in the Philippines, plastic and tao, it's because tao can be formed into whatever opinions you want them to form. So there's some similarity there. But of course, plastics have become ubiquitous, so they're all over. And initially, plastics were considered as alternatives to natural materials, such as leather, paper, building materials, and clothing. But then plastics have created new applications that could only be achieved with plastics. So here you talk about Teflon, fiber optics, electronics, medical devices. There are no natural counterparts for these types of materials. And unfortunately, most plastics are not biodegradable, and they contain additives to attain properties for specific applications, to prolong life, and to reduce cost. Many additives are toxic and harmful to humans and the environment. Now, it's important to note that there are 2 types of plastics. There are thermoplastics, which are generally recyclable, and thermoset plastics, which are generally not recyclable. So in the photograph that you see there, I've labeled the plastics which are thermosets and thermoplastics. So you have to recognize the difference if we're going to do recycling. Now let's understand plastics and development. Well, the first industrial revolution around the 1760s involved mechanization and the use of coal for energy. Now, the second industrial revolution came around 1860 to 1930, and this also came with the development of chemical synthesis. And here, chemical synthesis used coal and petroleum for plastics. The examples here would be bakelite, which came from coal tar, and that was one of in fact, the first plastics that were produced and something which we still use up to this day. And nylon, which came from petroleum. You distill it, you get benzene, and then you get the starting materials for nylon. So the second industrial revolution involved the use of coal and petroleum to make plastics. Now, the third industrial revolution, from about 1950s to 1990s, was the rise of electronics and computerization. And here, plastics played a key role. So all the wires that we have are coated with plastic. Printed circuit boards are also plastic. And today, we have the fourth industrial revolution, or 4IR, 1990s to the present. So you have the World Wide Web, Internet of Things, 3D printing, nanotechnology. These all involve plastics. So for example, satellites use Kevlar and Teflon. You have plastics in flexible solar panels, polystyrene sulfonate. You have fiber optics, which are also Teflon. So the fourth industrial revolution uses a lot of plastics. Now, the total amount of plastic produced is approximately equal to the global population. So if you plot the growth of the population and the global production, if each person on the average uses as much plastic as his weight, so there are about 7.5 billion people, on the average of 40 kilograms per person, you have 300 million tons of plastic, which is how much plastic that we have. So everyone uses plastic. And there are many types of plastic. Of course, you have microplastics and macroplastics. We often see, of course, the macroplastic, and that's what we complain about. We don't see the microplastic, so we can only read about it, but we consume it. And then you have the micro and nanoplastics. So all of these macroplastics would degrade in the environment. We talk about microplastics, but they also go into nanoplastics eventually from exposure to the environment. And nanoplastics are even more able to enter organs to affect cells directly. Now, we also have micro and nanofibers, which are very popular now. So you have all these sportswear. They're made of polyester, nylon, and you have these trade names. You're familiar with dry fit, spandex, and lycra. They're all polymeric materials. So polymers are the basis of modern plastics, and recycling them is a challenge. Now you've seen these recycling logos of plastics. There are 6 of them. You have polyethylene terephthalate, or PET, high-density polyethylene, polyvinyl chloride, low-density polyethylene, polypropylene, and polystyrene. Well, these are very useful. Unfortunately, we did not adopt them in the Philippines. I don't know why. And then there's this category number 7 of others. And others is actually many other plastics. So we think we're doing a lot by recycling these 6, but then the 7 is like many other things. And then there are many which are not recyclable. So you have acrylic polymers, bakelite, epoxy resin, PTFE, Teflon, polyurethane, and others. So it's easy to understand that despite this program on recycling, we still have a lot of plastic waste. The other concern with plastics, which is not commonly known, is that to make plastics, you have to add polymers to chemical additives. One major additive to polymers to make plastics are plasticizers, and the most notorious ones would be phthalate, which accounts for about 70% of the additives, and bisphenol A, which is a concern in a lot of packaging materials. You have photochemical and fire retardants, brominated compounds, as well as polyimide. You have antioxidants, free radical scavengers, acid scavengers, anti-ozone, anti-UV, etc., stabilizers. So there are a lot of additives in plastics. Now, the difficulty here is that you know what the polymer is, but you don't know what the additives are. Polyethylene, polypropylene, for that matter, are actually highly flammable if the polymer itself. So to stop them from burning, we add a lot of fire retardants to them. On that note, then you have a problem using plastics, waste to energy, because then you have plastics which were now designed not to be burned, and then you're going to burn them, which makes burning them, we can burn them eventually, but it's not economically, you have to put in a lot of energy to burn them. So that's one concern, I think, with incineration and waste to energy. It's the additives. Now, the other concern with additives are the health impacts. So this article in 2018 traced the life cycle of chemical additives in plastics, their life cycle with manufacture, use, recycling, and disposal. And they note that additives create complications in all stages of life cycle of these plastics. And the inappropriate use, disposal, and recycling may lead to undesirable release of additives. Chemical additives are also used in plastic packaging materials, and many of them are hazardous. So in this plot, in this Venn diagrams, they classify 148 of the most hazardous chemical additives associated with plastic packaging and their various impacts. So they have environmental impacts, health hazards, endocrine disrupting compounds, and persistent bioaccumulating and toxic compounds. And depending on the additive, then they have different effects. So additives are quite complex. Now, this is a slide I borrowed from Academician Kulaba on lifecycle analysis. Since I'm not an engineer, I would just reference it to the expert, and you can ask Dr. Kulaba about lifecycle analysis. Now, the lifecycle analysis of paper bags versus plastic bags was covered both by Academician Kulaba and Academician Oriarte in two different talks. And uniformly, they say that life cycle analysis studies conclude that plastic bags have a smaller environmental impact than paper bags. And the key to reducing environmental impact is to reuse as many times as possible. Unfortunately, Uniqlo didn't listen to Academician Kulaba and Oriarte, and they think they're going eco-friendly by replacing their plastic bags with recycled paper. So we should tell Uniqlo not to go on with this. So their marketing is not well advised. There was also a talk by Academician Oriarte about glass versus plastic bottles. And here, the conclusions are not as clear as the bags. Comparative environmental impacts of glass bottles versus plastic bottles are not as clear and definitive as that of paper bags versus plastic bags. Glass bottles can be reused or recycled in a closed loop into more glass without much of integrity, while plastic bottles are not recycled into plastic bottles but into lower types of use. So you can't take a plastic bottle and then recycle it into another plastic bottle. And of course, the transport of glass bottles is more expensive because they're heavier and they're breakable. So understanding plastic waste, ubiquitous use results in ubiquitous waste. So the more we use, then of course, the more waste we generate. There are numerous types of plastics, and most plastics are not biodegradable. We have to recognize the hazards of plastic waste depend on the size of the particle or fiber. We usually worry only about the things we see. So we complain about macro waste, but we don't see micro and nano waste, which are also harmful. And chemical additives, which we're not aware of, pose potential harm during use and disposal. And a significant proportion of plastics are single-use plastics of modern lifestyle, such as fast foods and convenience foods. So proceeding to the second topic, from the 3 R's to the 4 R's. Well, the concept of the 3 R's started around the 1970s. Of course, we all know reduce, reuse, and recycle. By reduce, the intention is to, to reduce. If we're going to focus on anything, it's reduce the amount of single-use plastic that we use, including balloons. We try to reuse them, so you can knit them into baskets. You see people selling rags out of these plastic materials, and of course you make gardens out of them. And recycling is you melt it and then do something else with it. So there's the Davao facility that makes these chairs for schools. And recently, you've seen this in the news, using plastics for roads. I think they've been using it for a while in India. India is hot, so the plastic naturally melts on the road, and they say it's better than the regular roads. And this news item about, San Miguel was gonna use recycled plastics for roads. But even with the 3 R's, we still have mountains of garbage. So quite obviously, the 3 R's are not enough. Now, the United Nations Environment Assembly, around February, committed to significantly reduce single-use plastic products by 2030. So note that they did not advocate to completely phase it out, but just to significantly reduce single-use plastics. But minimizing single-use plastics for packaging should only be the first step. In this graph, you can see that packaging accounts for the largest proportion of waste would come from packaging, but you have many other sources of plastic waste that we have to address. So even after we, even if we're gonna focus on single-use plastic, we shouldn't stop with just talking about single-use plastic. So from the 3 R's, which is reduce, reuse, and recycle, which is also called cradle to grave, we'd like to move to the 4 R's, or the circular economy, which adds the component of redesign. Now here, the cradle to grave really means the grave is the landfill. And even with a judicious reduce, reusing, and recycling, you can see that the grave is getting bigger. So we have to move from just designing things for the grave, and to redesign them for really recyclable materials. And this is the circular economy. Now, the circular economy is a proposal made by the World Economic Forum and the Forum of Young Global Leaders, and it aims to develop paradigms for the 4th Industrial Revolution. So when we talk about the 4th Industrial Revolution, the World Economic Forum is suggesting that we also consider a circular economy, which is basically redesigning plastics towards a circular economy. And so if we quickly go through the components of the circular economy, we start with number 1 is the supply chain, and this is to design use of circular materials. In other words, plastics or polymers which are by design recyclable or recyclable. The second is a sharing platform to increase utilization rates through collaborative use or ownership. In a way, this is almost like Grab. Grab, many times you don't need to have a car, because if Grab really works, then everyone will just take a Grab and you can get to where you are. Similarly here, maybe you can have collaborative use or ownership of plastic. Third is product as a service. The producer retains product ownership, which is another term for extended producer responsibility. In other words, the producer, they don't end the responsibility after they've launched the product. Product life extension, prolonging life cycle through repair, reprocessing, and resale, and resource recovery, which is basically the recycling aspect. Okay, 10 minutes. Now, here's some things we can do to redesign our plastics, and that's to use bio-based polymers. And here are 2 examples of coconut coir and agroforestry. You can extract the lignin, and from the lignin, you can make biodegradable lignin-based products, polymers, and other compounds. So these are actually taken from publications which cited the use of cocoa coir and agroforestry. In one of the RSMs, Academician Montano highlighted the potential of seaweeds, Capophycus and Eucuma, for these would be biodegradable polymers, and this can be used for utensils as well as cups and packaging as well. So in the Philippines, we do have bio-based materials that we can or should develop. So we go to the third topic, strategies for the management of plastic waste in the Philippines. When we talk about plastic waste in the Philippines, it's really covered by RA 9003, the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act of 2001. And here it says that waste must be managed from the point of generation to the point of disposal. This is the ideal situation. So you have the waste generator, which is us, the household, restaurants, etc., and they take care of waste handling, sorting, storage, and segregation. And there are rules to cover each aspect. So the waste generator should follow Rule 9 and Rule 11. and then they're collected. The collection is the responsibility of the LGU, the local government unit, so that's the barangay, municipality, or city, and there's a rule to cover that. Sorting and processing at the municipality or city level, they should have materials recovery facility, Rule 11, and then disposal, the responsibility of the city, which is the landfill. So that's RA 9003. However, just some comments on this. RA 9003 really tackles solid waste as a whole, just written in 2001 when plastic waste wasn't such a concern. So plastic waste needs a different strategy or maybe an enhanced strategy. RA 9003 is based on an end-of-pipe approach and ultimate dependence on landfills. So everything still goes to a landfill. And there's lack of attention to industry and research. With knowledge on plastic, you know that it's not a simple matter to handle disposal of plastic. So plastic waste management in circular economy, what we would like is that a recycling industry be expanded and that a reuse industry should also be expanded so that the amount of landfill that you use will be much minimized. This is a figure taken from the Philippine Plastics Industry Association, their supply chain and industry linkages. And here, they identified upstream, which is gas or naphtha, cracker plant, plastic resin midstream, and then downstream fabricators. Now, under a new system, then the amount of upstream naphtha should reduce, and we increase the component of biodegradable polymers and recycling industry into the midstream. So that's how we would sort of rethink the plastic industry supply chain. Now, there have been some proposed legislation related to management of plastic. Here are 4 bills that were filed last year and previous years. With the main provisions, they talk mainly about single-use plastic. So House Bill 983 by Congressman Fortun, transition from ordinary plastic bags to biodegradable plastic bags and so forth, all the way to the 4th. And recently, just earlier this month, Congressman Pangilinan also filed a bill on single-use plastic. So our congressmen have concerns also about plastic waste. And I think it's important for us to be able to guide the legislation properly so that it will work properly. So what we need is a holistic strategy for the management of plastic waste. First, we should abandon the end-of-pipe approach to plastic waste and end dependence on landfills, or at least minimize our dependence on landfills. We should move from the 3 R's to the 4 R's. We should engage all stakeholders, which is essential, industry, government, and very important, consumers. We should educate consumers for a sustainable lifestyle and responsible consumption. Eliminate non-essential use of plastic products, especially single-use plastics. Adopt a circular economic model for plastic production cycle. We need an enhanced governance framework within a supportive ecosystem. We need R&D for recycling of plastic waste, development of new biodegradable materials, development of safe chemical additives, and non-fossil fuel-based starting materials, and strengthen and harmonize global programs monitoring and assessment of plastic products to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goal targets. Now, the successful management of plastic waste, I think, really needs a right ecosystem. It cannot just be a law. It has to have it will work only within an ecosystem. And the first component here are the consumers. If you ban plastics and tell consumers not to use plastics, they're going to get mad and the law won't work. So we need the consumers. And of course, with consumers, you need public education. We need good regulations. We need strong and informed local government units. We need a chemical and plastics industry to buy into these objectives. Of course, we need R&D and stakeholder governance. I think Academician Rolla will talk about stakeholder governance. And it has to have a global perspective, so we have these sustainable development goals. So I'd just like to go back to this 4IR, to redesign plastics towards a circular economy. So for each one, these are the components that would make them work. So for the circular supply chain, you need research and you need the industry. For the sharing platform, it has to be supported by the right legislation. Of course, you need the consumers to buy into the system, as well as public education. Product as a service, to support this, you need, of course, legislation, the consumers, education, and the industry. Product life extension, consumers, education, local government units, and the industry. And for resource recovery, you need R&D, industry, and the local government units. So you need all of the participants in the ecosystem to make a circular economy to work. So in closing, we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, and the fourth industrial revolution must include solutions to plastic waste. So on that, we should reduce, reuse, recycle, and redesign. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Academician Dairit, for that comprehensive talk on plastics and the four R's. Before we proceed to the first panelist, I would like to introduce our rapporteur. I missed that page. And so let me introduce our rapporteur. He is Dr. Arnold Vihaliare. Dr. Halyare is currently a professor of biology at the University of the Philippines, Manila, and the director of the National Graduate Office for the Health Sciences, or NGOHS. His expertise is on environmental toxicology, where he elucidates the mechanisms of toxic responses in organisms exposed to single chemicals or cocktail of contaminants present in water, soils, and sediments. He holds a diploma in ecology from Lincoln University, New Zealand, 1998, PhD degree from the Eberhard Karls University of Tübingen in Germany, 2005, with an Alexander von Humboldt Fellowship in 2008. He undertook postdoctoral studies at the RWTH Aachen University and at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research in Leipzig. And in 2007, Dr. Halyare was acclaimed as one of the outstanding young scientists of the Philippines by the National Academy of Science and Technology. So our first panel discussant is Academician Ernesto J. Del Rosario. Let me introduce him. He obtained his Bachelor of Science in Chemistry degree, magna cum laude, from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, 1963, Master of Science and PhD degrees in Physical Chemistry from Cornell University. And then he did postdoctoral research in biotechnology at the University of New South Wales, Australia, 1976 to 1977. He was given several awards, including the 10 Outstanding Young Men Award in 1978. He was also one of the first awardees of the Outstanding Young Scientist Award in 1980, then given by the Department of Science and Technology, and which later was adopted by DOST-Phil. And in 2011, he was elected Academician of the National Academy of Science and Technology, Philippines. For more than 4 decades, he taught at the UP Los Baños, several undergraduate and postgraduate courses in physical chem and biotechnology, and he was appointed Professor Emeritus upon his retirement. May we call on Academician Ernesto del Rosario.
Thank you, May. Because of the limited time, can I start, please? This is a summary of our separate presentations with Dr. Cuevas and Dr. Diaz. Dr. Cuevas and myself are from UP Los Baños, and Dr. Diaz is from UP Diliman. There's an operator, please. Next slide. Okay, this is of course, the goal of our presentation, as well as this forum or this session, is on solving or trying to solve the plastic pollution, which is worldwide. Next. Well, this has been mentioned, but just to emphasize, plastics, or thermoplastics for short, are able to change their form when they are heated. As you know, in Tagalog, we say, plastic mo naman, because you're like chemical plastic, you can easily change your form. The common plastics, as we know, have the letter P in front. That means poly or many. So we have polyethylene, PP, polypropylene, S, styrene, vinyl chloride, tetrafluoroethylene, etc. So you can learn a little of chemistry from the letters. Okay, a little bit of chemistry, I hope you don't mind. So if you look at the chemical formula, that is CH2CH2. Of course, if you know, you remember chemistry, as a single molecule, there's a double bond. That's ethylene. Of course, you can guess what this is. It's vinyl chloride. So the letter after the first P is the monomer. So this is propylene. This is what? Styrene, ethylene, polyethylene terephthalate. That's a bit more difficult. Urethane. So you have learned a little bit of chem. Next slide, please. Okay, more than 90% of commercial plastics are derived from fossil fuels, like petroleum and natural gas. Okay, these are called fossil-based plastics. The other type is called bio-based, meaning they are based on biomass. Of course, we call biomass derived from plants. This is something that is very important. Ethylene can be made from petroleum or from ethanol, and ethanol can be made from sugar, which is biomass. So you can have two types of ethylene from biomass or from petroleum. So polyethylene is either fossil-based or bio-based. So when somebody tells you it's a bioplastic, bio-PE, doesn't mean it's biodegradable. It's not. Next slide, please. So bio-based plastics, some people think that they can fool you, so please don't be fooled. Doesn't mean that if it's bio-based or derived from biomass, it's biodegradable. It's not. As I mentioned, bio-PE is not biodegradable. Next, please. This is more of chemistry, which I hope you will appreciate. Ethylene can be derived from ethanol, and ethanol can be, well, ethanol is in beer, in wine, in, hard liquor. So that's based from sugar. And ethylene can also be made from petroleum by cracking or reducing the molecular size. But ethylene can be made into polyethylene. This is what I mean by it can be bio-based or fossil-based. Next, please. So the topic of our session part is biodegradability of plastics. You see, the bottom line in pollution is to make sure that the chemical is ultimately biodegradable. What does that mean? That means that the final product after degradation in the environment should be water, carbon dioxide, and methane. If it's anaerobic, there's no oxygen. And of course, the agent of biodegradation, which is the microorganism. Now, of course, we don't like carbon dioxide and methane because these are responsible for global warming and pollution of the air, atmosphere. So we want plastic to be ultimately degraded into these elementary chemicals. Next, please. Okay, this is a little bit of biochemical mechanism. How do we degrade plastics or polymers? First, they are cut down into the monomers or the individual molecules. Like polyethylene can be degraded ultimately, although it takes probably thousands of years if you leave it alone, into ethylene. That's why polyethylene can be degraded into ethylene, but it's very, very difficult. And what is responsible for that? These are enzymes which are called depolymerases, meaning they cause depolymerization, meaning break down the polymer into monomers. Okay, after breakdown of the polymer, so you get oligo, meaning few mers or few small units. Can have also 2 units or mono units. They are further degraded into carbon dioxide and water, or in the case of anaerobic or no oxygen present, into methane, hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, and water. Okay, this is what happens or what's supposed to happen when you want to degrade plastics. Next, please. Okay, again, I hope you don't mind my repetition, but it's very important. When you hear the word or the phrase bioplastic, it can either mean the origin from biomass or it means biodegradable. It's a bit confusing, but I'm sure you can understand. Please. Okay, this is also very interesting but can be complicated. When you hear the phrase or the word bioplastics, it can mean either biodegradable or bio-based, meaning derived from biomass, like starch or cellulose. There are some bioplastics which are biodegradable and some which are not. So you can see this ellipses. So the common or the inner subset are those which are biodegradable and are bioplastics, like polylactic acid, starch, polyhydroxy benzoate or benzene anyway, PHB. But the others are not biodegradable. For example, polyethylene, as I said, and some of these other plastics. So it can be a bit confusing. Next, please. Okay, now another important thing is, how do you determine whether a plastic is harmful to the environment? The final test, or the crucial test, is compostability. Of course, you know what is composting. You want to buy organic foods, which use natural fertilizers or compost. Many people do not want to use chemical fertilizers like urea or ammonium sulfate. So the ultimate test of degradability of any material in the environment is whether it is compostable or not. Meaning to say it is ultimately degradable if you leave it within reasonable time, few years perhaps, or preferably less than a year. Meaning to say a plastic or a material can be biodegradable, but it can take 1,000 years or perhaps a few hundred years. Well, that's a bit too long, right? So it doesn't mean that when somebody talks about biodegradability, it's good because it can take 1,000 or a longer period of time, number of years. So again, let me emphasize the question to ask a manufacturer is it compostable or not? Next, please. Okay, a little confusion arises when a manufacturer of plastic says that when you add the chemical additive like Vice President Dairit of NAS said, it's also biodegradable. Then people think, oh, it's good, it's biodegradable. But actually, also biodegradable from my readings and from reputable sources, they are concerned only with biofragmentation. So studies done in the US and in Czech Republic found that when they add in standard tests microorganisms to test the effectivity of these chemical additives or chemically treated non-biodegradable plastics, these are not biodegradable. They are only oxo-biodegradable, meaning they are fragmented, but they do not eventually are degraded into carbon dioxide, water, and the other elemental materials. Next, please. Next slide. Okay, a little bit. Why are some plastics so slow in biodegradation? Like polyamides like nylon takes 83,000 years. Others like polyanhydrides take only half an hour. Well, it's in the chemical reaction and in the structure of the material. Like nylon, which is a polyamide, is a very durable, very strong material. Because like cellulose, the fibers are very dense and difficult to be reacted even by enzymes or even by acid for that matter. But others are more reactive like anhydrides. You see, you add water, it becomes the acid, organic acid. Next, please. Okay, just a bit of information on some bioplastics like starch-based, lactic acid-based, lignin, cellulose-based. Next, please. Okay, I have to reduce my slides. Anyway, just to give you an idea, the fossil-based biodegradable polymers in red are very, very small proportion of the total number of degradable plastics. The rest, like polyethylene terephthalate, these are the most abundant. These are the plastics used in plastic water bottles, single-use plastics. Next, please. Okay, this is what I mentioned, that the oxo-biodegradable plastics, they promote abiotic degradation, including fragmentation, but not ultimate chemical degradation. Next, please. Okay, this just a repetition of the controversy about oxo-degradable plastics. And as I said, scientifically, these are not biodegradable. That's why a study in 2018 even said that these oxo-biodegradable plastics should be restricted in use, in distribution, in use to the public. Next, please. Okay, this is what I mentioned in the US, in the University of Michigan. There was a study, 3-year study, which showed that the chemical additives did not significantly increase biodegradation of the plastics to which were added these chemical additives. And next slide shows that in the, yes please, in the Czech Republic, a 3-month study also showed that the additives did not enhance biodegradability. Next please. Okay, now I'll mention this in relation to the studies done in UP Diliman by the group of Dr. Leslie Joy Diaz on the bioplastics which they're working on as biodegradable plastics. So cellulose, as you know, paper is more than 95% cellulose paper. Like cotton also is more than almost pure cellulose. So you have glucose linked beta-1,4, which are in very long chains. Next, please. Another material they studied is chitin, which is poly-beta-1,4 and acetylglucosamine. So it's similar to cellulose, except that you have this group, an N-acetylglucosamine, instead of hydroxyl group, OH, in the polymer. Next, please. Okay, this very, very tasty thing here, creature here. Aside from the nice flesh, you can also use the chitin, which is the polyacetylglucosamine. Chitin can be made into plastics. Of course, you have also protein and calcium carbonate. Next, please. Okay, at the laboratory in the UP Department of Mining, Metallurgical, and Materials Engineering, Dr. Diaz did some research on biodegradable plastic materials from locally non-food resources like the crab carapace or shell, as well as from cellulosic materials. Next, please. So these are some researches done by the group of Dr. Diaz on the synthesis or production of biopolymers at UP Diliman based on recycled material like cellulose and chitin, different designs and structures. Yes, please. Next. Work done at UP Los Baños, on the other hand, by microbiologist Academician Cuevas, involved isolation of bacterial isolates, including also fungal isolates, in the degradation of polyethylene, as well as polyurethane. Next, please. Okay, this is this polyethylene after storage, exposure to forest environment. You can see holes here, which shows degradation. But this is 4 months. That's only partial degradation. So if you imagine how long will it take to completely biodegrade this, I'm sure it will take more than a year or maybe several years. That's what I said. Polyethylene is very, very durable in terms of chemical degradation. Next, please. Okay, the group of Dr. Cuevas also look at polyurethane. This is what you have in foam, polyurethane, making cool, like what do you call this? Not styrofoam, but in bed, I think, bed material, polyurethane. Okay, the group of Dr. Cuevas was able to to use this microbial to cause liquefaction of the polyurethane, the foam plastic material. So after some time, the almost solid material became very fine materials. Next, please. Okay, here are some recommendations that we have made. Government incentives should be given to processors and manufacturers of biodegradable plastic products. Importation and sale of non-biodegradable, especially single-use plastic products, should be restricted and heavily taxed. Funding and logistical support should be provided for research and development on the following: chemical and biological evaluation of commercial additives for enhanced biodegradation of plastics, and economic feasibility studies on production of biodegradable plastics should be supported using local feedstocks. Next, please. Okay, for accelerating development of biodegradable plastics, Dr. Diaz has made these recommendations: develop downstream processing of agricultural and aquacultural products and byproducts, development of manufacturing technologies, including smart machineries for efficient and competitive mass production, and strengthen business culture with research motivation for Filipino entrepreneurs. Next. This is by Dr. Cuevas. There is a need for a multidisciplinary approach: microbiologists, environmental engineers, biochemists. Examples, they should work together in order to develop a technology for an environmentally friendly plastic waste disposal system. And she also zeroed in on the procurement law, Republic Act 9184, which must be derived first. I can see the support of our research personnel. That's very, very important. It's hampering our research efforts tremendously. So this law is not a deterrent for corruption, meaning it does not solve the corruption problem. Next. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Academician Ernesto Rosario. He talked about biodegradation of plastics or the lack of it. So it's still, it's a very searchable area. And I think our researchers really would like to have that procurement law amended also. If you have noticed, no, we don't have plastic cases anymore for our tags, okay? So that's part of reducing plastic waste. However, while having our lunch, our national scientist noted, oh, what's this container? Is this reusable? I said, we know that the bento boxes in Japan are reusable, hard plastics. But I really don't know whether the light plastic compartment inside the bento box is reusable or not. So we hope that the management will take a look at that. Okay, so our next speaker will talk about governance. She is an expert on governance in solid waste management, but this time she will focus on plastic waste. So Academician Agnes C. Rola is a professor emeritus and former dean of the College of Public Affairs and Development at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. She has a bachelor's degree in statistics and MS degree in agricultural economics, both from the University of the Philippines. And she has a Doctor of Philosophy degree in agricultural economics from the University of Wisconsin, Madison. She was elected member of the National Academy of Science and Technology Philippines in 2011. Let's welcome Dr. Agnes Rola.
Thank you very much, Academician Mendoza. Good afternoon, everyone. So at this point, I would like to talk to you about how we, that means you and I, can help in plastic waste management, and why is it important for government to support the waste management programs, given that the plastics, when outside of our households, becomes a public bad. So we have public goods and public bads, right, economists? Now, government just looks at public goods, but I think it's important that government also looks at public bads. So my talk will be about the challenges in governance and implementation of the solid waste management programs and focus on plastics. Earlier this morning, national scientist Dr. Domingo has said that enacting the law is a walk in the park, but implementation is something else. For this particular topic, implementation is a walk towards the highest peak of the mountain. It's a very, very challenging one. Okay. All right. So there are 4 parts to this presentation. First, I would just like to briefly talk about the legal basis for our solid waste management programs, which is the Philippines RA 9003. Then I will describe the institutional mechanisms that are inside that law. And then I would look at the progress in the local level implementation of the law as gathered from data from secondary sources. And I would also like to give you a model for institutional innovation for sustainable solid waste management, which was a case study that was funded by the UP Systems Emerging Interdisciplinary Program. Not working. Okay. So, what is this RA 9003 all about? This was earlier mentioned, but the passage of this law, which is the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act in 2001, was considered a landmark policy because of its integrated approach to solid waste management. All right, so here are some of the provisions of the RA 9003 which we can actually monitor. So first, it provides for the mandatory segregation of waste at the household level. Okay. Mandatory segregation of waste at the household level, with collection vehicles having the appropriate compartments for the sorted wastes. So of course, I don't think any local government unit can afford having a vehicle with appropriate compartments of biodegradable and non-biodegradable waste, right? Second, the law also mandates the establishment of recycling centers, or what we call MRFs, at every barangay nationwide. And as will be seen later, this has a very, very low score. And the first, the reason for this is that the barangays wouldn't make this a priority, therefore, they will not have the money for this. Third, the law requires the preparation of a 10-year solid waste management plans by all local government units. Again, very low score. And the fourth is that the law allows for the creation of a municipal and provincial solid waste management boards with corresponding functions. All right. So there was a public consultation, national consultation, when the framework was established, and here are some of the issues raised during those consultations. One, that some relevant agencies, such as the Department of Education, are not members of the National Solid Waste Management Council, and that the 10-year program seems to be not a really long-term solid waste management plan at the local level, and there is no room for private sector participation in the law, and that there's no database management provisions that can help synchronize solid waste management at all levels. So those were some of the issues raised. Okay, for the institutional mechanisms, so the law provides for these particular governing boards at all levels. At the national level, we have the National Solid Waste Management Committee under the office of the President, but the person responsible is the DNR Secretary. And that committee is supposed to prepare the National Solid Waste Management Framework. And then there's this most important center called the National Ecology Center, where the Environmental Management Bureau Director heads, and its responsibilities, among the responsibilities, are to establish and manage a solid waste management information database in coordination with other agencies. And I visited this National Ecology Center, and well, it has a lot of problems. There's also a solid waste management board headed by the governor, the city and municipal solid waste management board headed by the mayors, as well as the barangay solid waste management committee headed by the barangay captains. So all of these boards have their own set of responsibilities. All right, so another ideal institution that is in the law is the Regional Ecology Center. And this should be headed by the EMB Regional Director in ex officio capacity. Okay. Such center has the following, amongst the responsibilities are the following: shall maintain a multi-sectoral, a multidisciplinary pool of experts, including those from the academe, the business and industry, practicing professionals, youth, women, and other concerned sectors. And to facilitate training and education on integrated solid waste management. However, I don't know of a region that has an active regional ecology center. All right. So, again, as gathered from secondary literature, some of the challenges of the current institutional mechanisms. Earlier we had challenges of the law. Here is the institutional mechanisms. No budget, okay. No personnel. So that's true for the National Ecology Center as well as the Regional Ecology Center. No organizational structure for the NEC at the EMB. Okay. Also, the current institutional arrangement does not allow for the establishment of the NSWM funds. So that is why implementation at best is very weak. Implementation of the law. Okay, so these are very dated data, but I would just like to show you that the blue lines are created boards, the red lines are the active boards. So what you see here, and this is the city and municipal solid waste management boards, that there are more created boards than active boards. So there seems to be no sustainability in the board's existence. So this is for the city and the municipal solid waste. The barangay management committees are even worse. So there are creations of the committee, but except for CAR, which is of course a bit also questionable, there's not a lot of active barangay level committees. and this is 2010. So I was trying to look for a more recent data, but the National Ecology Center cannot give me one. So this is just my analysis of the trends that there are more provincial and city and municipal level boards that are active. However, at the barangay level, which is supposed to be the most important, the most strategic level of solid waste management programs, there are very few active barangay level committees. And therefore, there are a lot of sustainability challenges. Okay, sustainability because, number one, maybe there is no platform for such programs, solid waste management. Second, no capacities, especially at the barangay level. And third, of course, no funds. Next, please. Okay, so let me share with you the progress in the local level implementation of the law, again, as I gathered from secondary sources. This one is from the Senate Committee 2017. So in terms of collection, 5% in Metro Manila, but only about 40% outside of Metro Manila. So these are the local governments that have collection programs. Waste disposal, 2017 data, open dumping is still popular. Controlled dump site landfills are less. Diversion and recovery, so 31% only of all baranggays in the country have the materials recovery facilities. For local boards, so as of 2017, only 68% have provincial boards, 38% have municipal or city boards, and 13% have barangay committees. So, and remember, the law provides for a plan, solid waste management plan. So again, as of September 2017, while there were about 1,500 plans submitted to the EMP, only about 20% of the plans have been approved. And here are some more challenges in the RA 9003 implementation, again from secondary sources. And this validates our observation that capacity building and understanding the provisions of the law and in formulating the solid waste management plans are still lacking. Fund generation is needed, too many members of the board, unclear delineation of the various members in the provincial board, and of course, the lack of enforcement of ordinances that should have supported the solid waste management activities. All right, so for the remaining time, I would like to share with you our experience in an institutional innovation of sustainable solid waste management. Okay? And as I said, this was a project of UP system through the EIDR, and one of the activities of the water governance project. So the ecosystem or the resource is water. And we tested a model that is called Adaptive Collaborative Water Governance in the watershed of Santa Cruz River in Laguna in order to see whether such can provide for sustainability in terms of solid waste management, focusing, of course, on plastics. So by the way, plastics is about 11% of the total solid waste gathered in households and institutions here in the Philippines. Okay. So what do we mean by adaptive collaborative water governance? Okay. So this is an approach to the governance of the social ecological systems. So we're not just talking of the natural systems, but also especially of the social systems, in which groups of actors purposefully base their decision-making on social learning and critical reflection, emphasizes inclusion and equity, and strive for the balance and strategic collaboration with the other actors. Okay, so there are a lot of keywords there, but adaptive collaborative governance has been tested, especially in Africa, in the context of gender as well as forest resource management. So this particular approach has 4 stages, okay, and this is the protocol. So first is you need to build partnerships as well as assess initial conditions. Okay. Second, you need to have planning strategic actions, but this is planning together with the stakeholders. So we academics, we usually would just get hired as consultants in order to come up with some plans, local government plans. But for this particular purpose, what we did was to engage the locals, the local government, the community members, the barangay capitans, etc., in planning strategic action so that they will be the ones to really understand what their problem is or what their problems are. Remember, we went into this particular study site looking at water, but in the end, the stakeholders there said that they need solid waste management activities. And the third is to help the stakeholders develop their own solid waste management plan, as well as now implement an investment plan, again, together with the stakeholders. So Academe was able to facilitate each and every stage of this protocol. So this is just the description of our study site. So what I'd like to point out are the major actors. So there is a platform, there has to be a platform, okay? So it's the River Council in this particular example. The River Council consists of local government officials who are not elected, councilors, so they're elected, as well as the technical personnel within the municipalities and the barangay capitan, and there are civil society. So this is an inclusive group. Anyone who wants to be part of the council is welcome. So for this particular sub-watershed, there are 6 municipalities, and the Laguna Lake Development Authority, of course, is a part because Santa Cruz watershed, the one in yellow, drains to the Laguna Lake. Okay? And the Santa Cruz River is one of the major tributaries going to Laguna Lake. Okay? And the other major partner is the provincial and the community environment and natural resources offices. And of course, the Academe served as the facilitator. So what we did, all right. So what we did is we just followed the methodological framework. It's circular, it's adaptive, right? And it's social learning. Okay. So, but for this particular study, we started from scratch. We taught them how to write the minutes of the meeting. We taught them how to be prompt in going to the meetings, etc., etc. And we taught them all of these things that we do in the Academe. And of course, they appreciated that one. So there were monthly meetings, there are forums, training workshops. And so this is a capacity building, but capacity building that has gone in an expanded period of time. So it's not just a one-shot deal. Okay, so the first step was partnership building, and our project was lucky because there was already that river council that was organized by another project within the LLDA. However, that river council was a very loose organization, and it was not really it did not have any vision or mission, etc. So they were not really directed. But when we came in, we in a strategic planning exercise, we asked them to state their own vision and mission statements. And we also asked them to understand what their problem is and what they would like their Santa Cruz River system to be. And they said, yes, this river needs to be rehabilitated, but how to do this? And so part of what has to be done is, and that was based on their own agreement, was proper disposal and management of garbage. So from here, and these are all about garbage, human waste, animal waste, non-use or controlled use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, which are still waste. So to them, this was the most important and the most critical problem that needs to be looked at in order for them to rehabilitate the river. So, as we said, okay. Next slide, please. So this is just, okay, that last slide was just a validation of some national level data that we had. So we engaged with the stakeholders. This is now the third stage in the protocol. The Water Resource Management Plan done in 2017. And for them, their priority was solid waste management. So what the other thing that they did was to propose for an investment plan for them to help solve this solid waste management. Okay. All right. So some activities that the platform, the River Council did was to have those monthly meetings. Participation had been transparent and inclusive, and River Council, as they said, continuously gained knowledge about the watershed now. So it's not just the water, it's not just the waste, but it's also the watershed and the challenges. Okay? There are other rules of engagement. See, participation is voluntary. Okay? Sometimes they just contribute so that they will have snacks, so they don't need funding to go to the meetings because they realize that what they're doing is important for the community. So participation is voluntary, but they try to keep the municipalities' participation regularly because they need the LGUs actually to frame ordinances, promote good practices of municipalities. So right now, there is this private sector partnership with the River Council where a cement factory gathers their waste regularly so that that's how they would like to lessen the volume of solid waste in their municipalities, at the same time generating funds. So what are the outcomes so far? So the project started in 2012 and it lasted until 2017. We are now 2019. We are still attending the meetings, the monthly meetings of the River Council. But so these outcomes need to be studied some more, express it into data because these are some. Number one, for instance, is a perception, but they have started actually to gather data. Weighing the plastics that they get from the river downstream and from the municipalities upstream. So they reduce solid waste management according to the representatives from the Santa Cruz municipality. And there is a sustained partnership and there is emerging and hopefully a productive partnership with a private cement factory who gathers plastic waste and who also offers incentives. So in conclusions, again, the law must be implemented by building capacities at the local level, providing necessary funds, and creating a platform. Sustainability of our solid waste management plans implementation really depends on the commitments of the local institutions, the community members, the local governments, as well as you and me, the household members, to change our behavior as well. And we have some recommendations. Okay, so institutional strengthening through the HCG is needed to sustain the solid waste management activities. So this is a model that we have tested, and it has worked. So maybe this can work in some river basins in other parts of the lake of Laguna de Bay, as well as in other lakes in the country. Solid waste management plans should be crafted in a participatory manner and focused on achieving incentives should keep the spirit of collaboration always active. Leadership is an important factor for a committed river council. So again, this particular council had a very good leader. And the academe, okay, academe, attention, we have a very important role to play in all of these things. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Academician Rola. The young people in this in the hall and the not so young, you've heard an excellent example of scientific research in the community, on the community, with the community, for the community, on the development of a framework and plan for solid waste management and its actual implementation. And it has worked, no? So let's take note of that research is important and it can work and it will work. So thank you again, Academician Rola. We will now proceed with our last speaker for this plenary session. But before I introduce her, may I remind everyone to write your questions on your pieces of paper and give them to the ushers or usherette. Otherwise, I will be compelled to ask the first question. Okay, so our last but not the least, of course, speaker for this session is none other than Dr. Lynn Prasanta. She is a family medicine specialist and a clinical toxicologist. She finished her Doctor of Medicine degree at UP College of Medicine in 1984, did her residency training in family medicine at PGH, chief residency in 1989. And underwent extensive training in clinical toxicology at the PGH, UPCM Department of Pharmacology. She also has a diploma in healthcare evaluation and management skills from the University of Toronto, further training in Ontario Poison Control Center and at the University of Minnesota School of Public Health in 1998. Presently, she is full professor in pharmacology and toxicology at the UP College of Medicine Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology. So let us welcome Dr. Lynn Prasanta.
Maraming salamat, Dr. Mendoza. Magandang hapon ho sa ating lahat. Maybe at the end of the day, when we're talking about plastic pollution, the first thing that comes to our mind is, will we get sick with all the pollution that is there around us or in the environment at this point in time? So my task, perhaps because I'm a medical doctor, is to be able to walk you through as to what would be the evidence right now in literature that would tell us that there is the potential to health when it comes to plastic pollution. I think it has been It has already been emphasized to the lectures that were presented, or the presentations, both of Dr. David and Dr. Rosario, that will tell us that maybe among the different people around this table, we have been witness to the benefits of plastics. But at the end of the day, what happens is that the usage and at the end of the day, how we dispose of plastics have now offered a big risk that at this point in time, there's always a question of will the benefits of the use of plastic outweigh the risk, or the risk will be too much for us to really go back, go to the table, and again, look at what should be the best solution. We have seen that through the years how tons and tons of plastics have been thrown into our environment. In fact, in the 2015 data of the Ocean Conservancy McKinsey Center, Philippines is one of those 5 countries in Asia that would have half of the land-based plastic waste leakage. And that's a big challenge for all of us. So therefore, at the end of the day, as I've said in my first statement, is that what is the impact of plastic pollution to human health? So I have 2 tasks for the next 20 minutes. Number 1 is to present what will be the available information that we have at the moment when it comes to plastic pollution. Would it really have shown some toxic effects on humans? The second is to discuss data gaps that are needed in order to conduct proper risk assessment. At this time, a lot of us would say maybe we don't see any association yet between plastic use, plastic pollution, and health. But we want to find out, is the risk really significant? Is the potential risk for us to get sick at the end of the day really evident? This is something that, of course, is going to be a big challenge for us to establish that particular type of risk and to, at the end of the day, manage that risk. So when we talk about health effects, we always think of 3 important players or important factors. We talk about the environment that we're in, we talk about the agent, and we talk about the host. So these 3 important factors are things that we need to consider as we measure or as we define what will be the potential risks as far as plastic pollution. We talk about macroplastics, but I think Dr. Dairit mentioned it, that one of the big concerns that we have right now will be the microplastics and the nanoplastics. These are things that we don't even see with our naked eye at this time, and how much this form of plastics have already gone into biological systems of individuals and might, at the end of the day, cause ill effects. So let's look at environment. There are 2 major routes by which plastics can get into the system. One is, of course, through ingestion. The other one is through inhalation. Through ingestion, why? We have seen how much of our marine life has already been contaminated by a lot of plastics. Okay? And there have been studies that have shown that these different agents or chemicals that have been used to manufacture plastics, and the additives and the contaminants would have had already found their way into individuals. In fact, there have been studies that have already measured how much in milligrams per kilogram per day can we consume, depending on the marine life that we eat, especially fish products, okay? And therefore, they would say that if you eat the whole fish, the greater will be the milligrams per kilogram body weight that you're going to take in. Or if you're just going to eat a certain part of the tissue of the fish, then you have lesser in terms of the amount of this particular products that you're going to eat. The second route of exposure would be inhalational, although this is not as established as the oral route, but they have seen that it is because of some of the effects, and this was, I think, in the study done in Paris, that there's a presence of microplastics in atmospheric fallout, and this has already been reported, at about approximately 30% of which were confirmed to be plastics. Okay, so as I've said, generally it's still through ingestion. What about the agent? Dr. Dairit and Dr. Del Rosario have presented to us the different materials and chemicals that make up the plastic. Okay, I think what is important, I think Dr. Del Rosario stated, and I've learned from him about
those that are used, okay, to manufacture plastics, though they say it's biodegradable, but at that they may not be, which I will talk about the agent again, that one of the characteristics that we have to take into account will be the bioaccumulation, the persistence of this particular products. So he talked about styrene, he talked about polyurethane, he talked about the other components, and what we would also have to add on will be the additives, and I think that was also mentioned by Dr. Dairit. We talk about bisphenol A, we talk about phthalates, which are the additives to plastics. Other than the chemicals or the materials that are used to manufacture plastics, once they're in the environment, they get contaminated. Okay? And their contamination can be, again, a set of chemicals that are as toxic as the materials that have been used to produce this particular plastics. So examples in the literature would say there are metals, there are, of course, our good old pesticides, one of which would be our DDT, which up to now, because of its very, very long half-life, will still persist in the environment. And the third component that we have to take into consideration as far as the agent is concerned in plastic will be the microbes. As they are present again in the environment, there will be biofilms. Within 7 days, biofilms have already been formed, and a number of these microbiologic agents are, of course, the virulent type, of example of which will be Vibrio. So if you talk about the agent, we're not just talking of one single component, and we're all talking about many of those agents that might satisfy, that will satisfy 3 of the characteristics that will make this particular product toxic. So one will be, of course, its biopersistence. Dr. De Rosario was saying about it will take, it will take years. Okay, even you say it's biodegradable, it will take many years, maybe even past our lifetime, for the total degradation of these particular components. So because they're persistent, what happens, some of them can bioaccumulate when they get into the biologic system, and they can even biomagnify. So it's not just, again, the main components, but also the contaminants. So we know pesticides, metals, they do bioaccumulate, and because we are up in the web chain, in terms of the food chain, what may be the concentration of this particular chemical to a single-celled animal will be many thousand times magnified when it comes to man. Okay, so what about the third component is the host? Okay, we talk about all vulnerable populations, but many of the studies would have concentrated on the developing fetus, the child, and the woman of reproductive age group. But any one of us, because of our different vulnerabilities and our biologic characteristics as we grow up and as we age, there are those physiologic changes that will make us susceptible. In fact, there is one here that I think I emphasized that they've seen some evidence of associations, and this is when it comes to your phthalates, your diethylhexyl phthalates, that they have seen some association between the mother's urine and the anogenital distance, the penile width, and testicular descent in the male offspring. So you would see that there have been studies, but these have been done abroad, to really say that there have been some evidence right now of the developing child to be vulnerable. So what are the health effects? Okay? So it was again mentioned by Dr. Dairit that endocrine disruption is one of the major effects of all the components of plastic. And when you talk about endocrine disruptors, there are certain characteristics, but by themselves will be very difficult for us and a big challenge for us in the medical field when our patients will be exposed to these endocrine disruptors. Number one is because it only takes ultra-low doses like picograms, micrograms, nanograms for these particular chemicals to produce a significant health effects. Number two, it can be the latency of the disease. So even at this point in time, it's very difficult for me to say, or for us, or the studies to say, that we're exposed to plastic and I get sick at the end of the day. I develop an endocrine problem at the end of the day. Is it because I was exposed to plastics? It is the latency of the disease that it's very difficult for us to be able to directly define and put a direct relationship between the exposure and the health effect. Also, we would always look at, when you talk about endocrine disruption, is that there could be a multi-generational effect, which means that I may be exposed now, but my granddaughter or my grandson will even have a more serious effect than I would have. And that's the characteristic that is, again, a bit serious when it comes to endocrine disruptors. And of course, the endpoints. The endpoints can be multiple, and it not just be a single organ effect. And so because of this endocrine disrupting property, this again is a big problem for us to really be able to define the impact of plastics and the particular health effects. Another set of health effects will, of course, be the effect on our immune system. They could either induce or they could either enhance our immune system. And we know how important immune system is to us because it's the one that's supposed to protect us. All the nasty exposures that we may have in the environment, they may be chemicals or they may be microbiologic agents. Okay, so this is just an example as far as bisphenol A. And if you look at the studies, look at the diseases that they have seen, okay, and they have reviewed. These are those that we see every day, for those maybe the doctors around in this forum. The ischemic heart disease, diabetes, obesity. We're seeing many more of metabolic syndrome. It's not maybe because of the food that we eat, or is it because of our environmental exposures? There could be reductions in body and organ weight, most especially the behavioral abnormalities in children. These findings were initially seen in animals, and in Europe and the US, they've seen already studies, some not really a direct relationship, but they've observed for some of the women and men and their children presenting with this type of illnesses with exposure to bisphenol A. In fact, they're saying now in most of our plastic containers, especially the baby products, they always say it's bisphenol A free, and it's because they're trying to work it out, but it's not true. It's still not true. You cannot say 100% that what are there in the baby products. That's why any doctor would always encourage breastfeeding for children, feeding their babies. Because again, the bottle that we use to feed the babies will not by themselves be entirely safe. So let me go now to the next part, would be establishing a risk. Do we have enough mechanisms at the moment to say that we can establish particular risks? So if I am able to measure a particular end product or major chemical of this plastic in a biologic fluid, will I be able to say that this particular group of individuals will get sick along the way? So we will look into the risk assessment paradigm, which will of course include your hazard identification, hazard characterization, your exposure assessment, and your risk characterization. And we will apply, of course, plastics in these 4 different dimensions. So we look at hazard identification. Yes, they have studies to show that there have been documentations of the presence of the chemicals, of all these byproducts and all these additives and the contaminants. But the big challenge is at the moment is that, do we have levels to really say that these are safe or not? Or do we have ways and do we have certain standards and procedures to be able to measure this particular agents in different media, not just environmental media, but also biologic media. We have seen some studies in literature, but they are not as conclusive as perhaps when you talk about smoking, tobacco smoking, and cancer, and lung cancer. We have laboratory facilities. Do we have them here? I don't think so. That we have those laboratory facilities, and with those so many other environmental concerns that we have, will this be top in the list? Okay, and what will be our capability when it comes to identifying these particular chemicals. The second will be the hazard characterization, which of course be dose-response relationships. I talk about the effect, which is endocrine disruption. When you talk about endocrine disruption, there may not be an existing dose-response relationship, and so you cannot in any way be able to apply this particular principle. There are existing guidelines and guidance as far as like a number of these components, like bisphenol A, for instance, that it has been set at 0.05 milligrams per kilogram body weight as your reference dose, which means that that's the dose by which, above which, you can get sick. But what particular endpoint are we talking about? There are a lot of endpoints for bisphenol A. So are we talking about ischemic heart disease? Are we talking about diabetes or any other endpoint? Now, when we talk about exposure assessment, which is of course the third, this is a big thing that we have too. Okay, what is that particular exposure that we're trying to measure, okay, in the environment? Do we have enough, again, facilities to be able to measure what is in the environmental fate, which means the media, and of course, as far as the individuals are concerned? Okay, so if you look at I think this was mentioned by Dr. David in his talk, is that we're talking about nanoplastics and microplastics. And if you'll notice, because of the size, the particular size of the agents, there will always be the potential for them to access to all organ systems, access to all organs. And therefore, when you talk about exposure, then by theory, it's very easy for us, for the particular chemicals to get into the body. Now, in other countries, they have set certain concentrations, and I gave the example again of bisphenol A. There are studies for phthalates as well, that they have done and measured concentrations in different matrices. Okay, again, on our setting, limitations in measuring concentrations of chemicals will still be a big challenge for us. In my practice in toxicology, we're always being challenged by where do I send my samples to be able to say that my patient has already been poisoned by an environmental contaminant or pollution? Okay, so this is the exposure rate. They tried to compute exposure rate, and this is a study in New Zealand, and they saw that the exposure rate was less or below the total, the tolerable daily intake of bisphenol A. But again, there are issues of other sources of exposure that we need to consider, and again, our laboratory capabilities. So at the end of the day, let me just walk through the risk characterization. I talked earlier that we're not dealing with just one chemical. We're not dealing with just bisphenol A. We're dealing with phthalates, we're dealing with styrenes, the pesticides, the metals. And so you have multiple exposures, and of course you have your potential adverse interactions. You have multiple and critical health endpoints. We're not just talking of one. Then we're looking at latency period, which means that because of the chronicity from the time we're exposed to the onset of illness and the multi-generational effects is something that is very difficult for us to define. So my take-home points for this particular talk is that the knowledge on the adverse effects of plastics and human health is not comprehensive. A vicious